Well, I was born and raised in Blue Island, Illinois, which is a suburb of Chicago. Went to, grade school, high school there, and had a pretty normal childhood, I guess. I think I was happy I was a kid then than being a kid now, because I think life was a little more uncomplicated. When I graduated from high school, I was only 16 years old. I had started when I was 5, and I skipped 3rd grade. Well, I thought, well, I really can't go out and get a job. And a bunch of my school chums had said, well, why don't we join the National Guard? And there's a National Guard unit, 124th Field Artillery, on the south side of Chicago, and we'll join the Guard, and then we know what we'll be in. They're not just going to put us in the infantry or whatever. We figured we're just going to have to serve a year, and then we'd get out and have our year done. Well, that was all fine and dandy, except Pearl Harbor came along.
Well, my Uncle Jack and I have talked about some of his World War II experiences from time to time over the years, and I always thought that he was on a B-29, and he'd always correct me. Finally, I got it right that he was on a B-17 in World War II. And I was talking to some of my pals, Gary Weaver.
Gary Sinise, a venerable actor and director, has been a friend of the DAV since 1994. His performance in the movie Forrest Gump, his character as Lieutenant Dan Taylor, everyone who saw that film reacted in a way that we reacted, saying, my goodness, what a wonderful portrayal, what an honest portrayal of a severely injured, a catastrophically injured veteran who served his country. And I started talking to Gary over breakfast about our air show program, hoping to entice him perhaps to come to one of the shows and see what goes on, get him interested in the program. He said, Gary, you got a B-25, that's wonderful, but you know anyone who has a B-17 or access to a B-17? And I said, well, as a matter of fact, I do. Believe it or not, he looked at me and wondered if I was just kidding with him. And then he went on to say, my Uncle Jack, was a navigator on a B-17 during the war. And he flew 30 missions, survived those 30 missions, obviously. You think it would ever be possible that I could get him a ride on a B-17?
So I told my dad what I was planning to do. Once I knew that Gary could make it happen, we could figure out a date and everything, then I told my dad, I said, Dad, here's what I'm trying to work out for Uncle Jack. And my mom and dad, were shocked and, blown away by that. And I said, but we got to keep it a secret. As I said to Uncle Jack, I said, okay, June 23rd, you're going to Texas. And he just looked at me, and I had told my mom and dad, and he just looked at me, and he goes, oh, well, I'll have to see if I can figure that out and find, I might have something going on. I said, no, you don't have anything going on. You're going to Texas on June 23rd for the weekend, or June 24th. And so I told him that my band was going to play down here, and, I wanted him to come and experience the concert. And, well, we fooled him as long as we could.
The whole world benefited from this extraordinary generation of Uncle Jacks. Their life arc includes overcoming the Great Depression, fighting and winning the biggest, deadliest war in human history, and creating an age of economic prosperity and technological advancement which may never be equaled. Yet, they rarely talk about any of it. To me, he's always been just my Uncle Jack. It wasn't until I became active in veterans' causes that I really started thinking about what he'd done. what he'd been through.
And I think my first mission was into France. And it's like being at a movie. I mean, you're so new to all this, and you know, plane takes off, and you get in your group, and next thing you know, you're going over the English coast, and now you're going over the French coast, and you see a little flak over here, and I'd say for about the first 5 missions, it's just like, well, boy, isn't this something? Nothing's happened to you yet, and you see some planes get shot down, but it doesn't sink in yet. Well, anyway, we went to Leipzig. Now, it always kind of amazed me every time I saw this. As far as you could see in front of you, there were airplanes. As far as you could see back of you, there were airplanes. So we're on the bomb run, and we get hit. The one engine goes out, and with that, we lose a little power, and I'm in the lead ship, and we start to go down a little bit. Well, then the group follows us. So we go to the secondary. They're still following us. And we're trying to maintain altitude, but we just barely got to this airfield, and we dropped our bombs. But now we lost another engine. And about that time, the gas starts streaming out from under the wing, just a big stream. Well, we knew we were in trouble then. Well, so the group, they just keep on flying. They're going back. We're all by ourselves. And we said, well, we'll just keep going. And we'll go back as far as we can. If we have to bail out, or if the plane catches on fire, well, then we'll bail out. So we just kept going and going. We kept going down, down, just slowly. Now we only got about 2.5 engines because the other ones weren't working. And we just kept going and going. And pretty soon we pick up some fighters, a couple of P-38s that looked very nice sitting out here like that. Then we picked up some P-47s, and they'd, pick us up along the way. So that was kind of nice because we're all by ourselves. So we finally get to the coast, but this time we're down about 700 feet. And we didn't know whether we're going to have to ditch or what. So we knew, and we're practically out of gas. So we did land in England at a RAF base. We did get that. We got back that far, and so they came and got us then. But the plane was pretty well shot up.
We told Uncle Jack that we were recording his remembrances for an oral history project. At this point, he was still not aware of the surprise that awaited him.
You guys wouldn't tell me what this is all about. Well, look what we have right here.
You were a navigator, correct?
Right.
Well, we're getting ready to go fly, and our navigator called in sick today, so
Well,
would you do us the honor of going flying with us today?
You're going to actually go flying?
If you'll go.
Well, sure I'll go.
Well. Gary, would you like to go along?
I'll go.
Yes.
You want to go on a ride?
Sure I do. Yeah.
I wanted to be right with Uncle Jack to sort of experience, you know, his first time in the plane and be there when we took off. And just watching his face was pretty awesome. You know, it made me think, you know, what must it be like for him to be actually taken off in this plane again.
But I'd say, well, here we go. And then that was the first time. Then after that, it was here we go again. And yesterday, it seemed like we took off. In my mind, I was saying, here we go again. Let me tell you about going back home. After your missions, you got orders to go back to the States, and came in to New York Harbor. And I will have to say, when you see the Statue of Liberty as you're going by it, and that was just something else. I mean, you just can't believe that now you're home, at least up to that point. But that was a sight that you never forget. In a sense, it was kind of overwhelming. I mean, I had no idea that I would ever do anything like that again. And when we opened the door, and then I'm actually standing there, it was kind of a wow. I did see a B-17, but I was just, you know, surprised. There it sat, and it was a surprise. I will say.
After doing his duty and surviving the war, like millions of other veterans, Jack settled back into life in his hometown. He went to college and earned a degree from Northwestern University. He married a hometown girl and raised 4 children. They remained married for 50 years until her recent passing. He went to work for the hometown bank and remained there for 32 years.
I like what you're doing, is to preserve this, because it's true. Otherwise, it's just like some of the things I'm going to show you. They get put in the trunk and forgotten.
Not if we can help it, Uncle Jack. Not if we can help it.
If we look it up here, we can see the nose, and that's also the Norden bomb sight, the famous Norden bomb sight. And if you see over here on to his right, the bombardier, there's a stick up there, and that's the controls for these 2 guns that we have in the chin. And as I said before, they were in there only on the G model, and that was to ward off the head-on attacks by the Germans. Now, the bomb sight is famous for making these precision bombing, but it didn't work that well. So if you hit within 1,000, 2,000 feet, you were lucky. Sometimes you missed it by a mile. So we really didn't have precision bombing, even though the papers said we did. If we come on further around here, you can see this gun here, this gun here. That would be the navigator's. He would grab that gun, which it couldn't go with a range of these 2 50 calibers. And over there would be the bombardier if he was not manning these guns and wasn't flying the airplane, which he did on the final run. He would have those guns. Right. If you come on over, you look in here, that is where the navigator would be sitting, right there. He could sit out, he could look out through there. Through this hatch, when the pilot and the co-pilot and the navigator and the bombardier got in the airplane, they would actually open that hatch. That ladder, they did not have a ladder. They would throw their parachutes in there, they would grab it, and they would just swing themselves up in the airplane. Okay, when we're making our walk around, these 2 scoops right here are the air scoops. That's goes through here, it goes through the turbocharger and into the engine. The turbocharger allows this engine, these engines are 1,200 horsepower. It allows this airplane to operate to 25 to 30,000 feet. That was unusual in this day because this airplane first flew in 1935. So you have the scoops here, and what we're looking for is to make sure nothing's in there. We don't have a duck or a bird or somebody threw a beer can or something to that effect in there. These are our engines. There's 9 cylinders in it. It's 1,200 horsepower. There's over 100 horsepower in each one of those. It's a very reliable engine. The people that flew it during the Second World War, they thought this was probably the most dependable airplane that they'd ever flown. If you see the black over here, That was for the de-ice boots that they used. Sometimes they were on there, and most of the time they were off. They took them off. So we look in here, and by the way, this airplane, the average airplane that was over there, it was beat, the leading edge was beat up. This airplane is pristine compared to what they looked like when they flew them. So they were working on them as they flew their missions back. They were working on them, and they didn't care what they looked like. They just wanted to make sure that they were mechanically fine. So we look over at the gear. The gear on this airplane is electrical. The flaps are electrical. Everything in here is electrical except the brakes. The reason that is because Boeing figured, and this was even in the B-29, that if you lost a hydraulic line, you were going to lose everything if it was all hydraulic. So they made it electrical to make it more simpler. So you have a backup system on the gear. If we lose the electric, if we cannot get it, drive it down, there's a crank up there, and we have a drive out, and you can crank that down with 269 turns. And I know that because I've cranked it down one time. You know, we're looking at the gear, we're looking to make sure that it's over center, looking for the general condition. The brakes on this thing are expander tube. It's like an inner tube with brake pucks on the outside of it. And then you have hydraulic pressure that expands that, and that's how the brakes are. The squealing that you hear on the movies is legitimate. You can still hear it when it taxis, it goes squeak, squeak, squeak. That's a B-17. This is called B-17 smuts. It comes out of the airplane. If you'll see one drip right there. If it's not dripping, then it's out of oil. It's supposed to drip a little oil. We don't really have a limit, but we would try to, if it burned over a gallon in an hour, we'd try to find out what's the matter. On the line, you can change your cylinder on this airplane in about 2 hours. So it's a very dependable engine. And this is your exhaust. There used to be a shroud on here. They attempted to heat the airplane at one time, and it didn't work out. So there was no heat, there was no oxygen. They were flying at 25,000 feet. Some of their missions were 8 hours long. The bum load, depending on how far it was and how much fuel you had to put on. This airplane carries 1,700 gallons of fuel. These right up here, these are the oil cooler scoops. You can see them in there. That right there is where one of the fuel pumps, and if there's fuel dripping out of there, you have a problem. If you look underneath here, if you want to get underneath here, Rich, and look underneath here, this is the turbocharger right there. This turbocharger, the exhaust comes through here, and there's a turbine in here, and it turns it just like it would a turbine in a dam, and it goes out here. That turbine has another turbine that actually compresses the air so that you can fly at higher altitudes. So that's a very important feature of this airplane. I don't know if these turbines work on this one. We had ours disabled because we didn't need them. We weren't going to fly above 14,000 feet. Some of these airplanes still have them operational. We didn't. We had disabled them. And you're looking for this thing. You're looking for obvious leaks around here that are not there. I mean, we've got a little oil leaking out of here, but that's normal. So that's not a problem. So we come on around and we're looking to see if anybody put anything up there. A bird is flown in there. We're looking for leaks around the prop hub or right in here. It's a reliable prop, so you don't have much problem with it. Over here, you've got your scoops, more your scoops over here. That is your air scoop for this engine right here. And that our landing lights, and there you can see the boots over here. And it also has fabric controls on it. And as we said before on some of the other ones, that was for two reasons. Number one, because it was light, and secondly, because it could be repaired real easy. You just put a piece of what we would call duct tape now on it, and it's ready to go. Otherwise, if it was aluminum, you'd have to put an aluminum patch in there and rivet it and all that stuff. So that's why it operates that way. Now this is that hatch that I was telling you about that's in the radio compartment. There was a 50 caliber machine gun that would slide out on a rack and he could come up here. Sometimes they took him out because the guy would get excited, he would shoot the damn tail off the airplane. So some of them didn't have that. And the B-17G, as far as the guns are concerned, they're staggered. The other side is up here because even though it looks big, you get inside of it, it's not big. So it's staggered so that one man wouldn't get in the way of the other one. It's the waist gun. And like I said, on the F model and the earlier models, that was open, and the guys were actually freezing to death. The earlier models had a blister up there with a stationary gun. And this, when I was talking about the dorsal fin, that's the dorsal fin, this part right here. The original ones, the tail just went straight down. But that gives you a lot more stability. Now let's see, tail wheel, there's not much you can say about the tail wheel. The tail wheel's retractable as the main gear is. So you got that. And we come on around and let's look. And the tail's kind of unique. The horizontal stabilizer is kind of unique in this, that it's reversible. I can flip this, take this out, flip it over, and this would be the bottom on the other side, and this would be the top. So that was so that interchangeability of parts. So on the, and this particular tail gun position on here is on the G model and the F model is a little different than the other ones. This has more of a greenhouse effect where he can see this gun sight. Here's the gun sight, and this was in the latter stages of the war. It was a computer gun sight. It was a mechanical computer, and they could crank in the altitude, and if they being attacked by Focke-Wulf 190s, they knew what the speeds were. They would crank that in, and that would give them an automatic lead when they were tracking the fighters. And these are your 250 caliber machine guns. That's fabric. This is fabric. Those are static discharges that we have here. Because we've got lights out here. Those are formation lights. You had you got lights that were on the side that were formation lights. I can't imagine flying formation at night in this thing, but they did. And formation, it was important when they were flying in enemy territory that they be in very tight formation, because they would usually have 12 of them in formation, and that was 120 guns that was protecting that, and the fighters respected that. But if there was a straggler, he's the one that got it. He was the impala that was behind the herd, so they would pick on him. And this door here is where the waist gunners, the ball turret gunner, and maybe the engineer, but the tail gunner, that's where they would come in. And they had their chutes, and most of them wore their chutes, except, or had their chutes real close by where they could snap them on, except the ball turret gunner. He had to leave his out. If they had problems, somebody had to crank him out of there and get him out and put that on. So to my mind, other than being claustrophobic, that would drive me nuts, worrying about somebody getting me out of that thing. But that takes us back to the wing route. Of course, these engines are the same, and that completes our walk around.
I was born 3 years after World War I. When I was 6 or 7 years old, World War I was still in the minds of everybody, including the airplanes. Pearl Harbor occurred December 1941. I knew immediately, because of my age, I was had to go into service. I saw this as my opportunity to learn to fly. I jumped at the chance. I didn't even think about the danger. I said, Lord, is today the day I get killed? Remember this, I was frightened, very frightened. And some kind of a peace came over me. Outside of Louisville, Kentucky. I was born in Grayson County, I lived at Fern Creek outside of Louisville. Went to school in Anchorage, Kentucky, and then to Fern Creek, Kentucky. I graduated from high school there, and I went for a short time to the University of Louisville, which was about 15 to 20 miles from where I lived. We finally moved to a 100-acre farm, and I had entered into a deal with my mother and brother. They did most of the work, about if I could not have to work at home doing farm work, I'd go out and get a job and pay for a tractor. And they jumped at the chance, and I jumped at the chance, and so I went and I started working for a bank as a runner. I made all of $50 a month, which was a big deal. And so I worked there, and I gave them half the money for the tractor. Of course, gasoline cost something like 17 cents a gallon then. And I had a Model A Ford, and I was able to drive that on 17 cents and buy clothes and still give $25 to my family. The war broke out, and I immediately came home. I was working out in Oklahoma then. War broke out, I came home immediately, and my mother, I was 20 years old. My mother would not sign my papers to go for flying. She was afraid of it, afraid I'd get killed. So I waited until I was 21, and I immediately went down to the office and signed up for aviation cadets. This was in February of 1942. Pearl Harbor occurred December 1941. I knew immediately, because of my age, I had to go into service. I wanted to go as a flyer. I saw this as my opportunity to learn to fly. I jumped at the chance. I didn't even think about the danger, because I wasn't aware of danger. So I was able to make it in that manner. So in July of that year, I entered into aviation cadets. Went to Maxwell Air Force Base for basic training to be what an officer should do, kind of thing. Finished there, then went to primary flying in a two-wing open cockpit steerman. And this is the first flight I'd ever had in an airplane, open cockpit. And so I was surprised, and I didn't like it. It wasn't a pleasant thing because the noise was new, and the movements and the pressures I felt were different. So I wasn't real comfortable. But the instructor did stall the airplane. Now that a stall is one of these maneuvers where you lower just like lowering the speed of an automobile, you lower the speed of the airplane. It no longer has enough air going over the wings, so it falls. Well, it fell. And it was like my going down an elevator, and I was petrified, and so I hung on to the throttle and the stick and my rudder pedals, and I froze on the controls. The instructor felt me freezing, so he said, "All right, Hicks, do what I tell you to." Now, remember this, at this point, cadets, you had to do what was right or you get kicked out. And it was pretty strenuous and pretty strict. So I knew I had to do what he wanted me to do, I'd get kicked out. And I didn't want to go back to shoveling dirt at home. So I went through the Air Force training, and I really worked hard, and I'm not trying to personally aggrandize, but I wanted to fly. And I was going to do any daggone thing they told me to do so I could be a pilot. This is what it amounted to. So I went from primary to basic, and then we finished basic training. We went to primary, basic, and advanced. We finished basic, and we went the ways that we went ways we'd like to go, or where we had to go. And I wanted to go multi-engine, so I went to multi-engine. Some of them wanted to be fighter pilots and went to single. That was the difference. And they learned different things at there. So I was in that and learned a whole lot about navigation, flying at night, using the radio, flying in weather, blind flying, and a lot of things there. Graduated there in April of 1943. Had about 2 weeks vacation, leave, and went to Lockburn Air Force Base, Ohio. I didn't feel any different. I just felt like I was where I wanted to be. And I did what I was told to do, and fine, they told me to do things I could do, and so I did them. And I really felt it was all for the good. But when I was 22, because I did pretty well in advanced, and I had made a request that I wanted to fly bombers. B-17 school was at Lockburn, so I spent a month in B-17 school learning how to fly B-17. And my first flight, I sat in the left seat, which is the pilot seat. The right is the co-pilot, and had to start using my left hand. I'm right-handed. Started using my left hand to fly with. Strange, but hey, heck, that's the way you got to do it. So I did it. Learned to do it. And I learned, I was very much concerned. That huge airplane, I'll never fly that thing. Pretty soon, it became a piece of cake. And so I spent my time there. I did well with it. I liked it, and I wasn't awed. I was respectful, but I liked the airplane. And went to the Rattlesnake Bomber Base in Pyote, Texas. Rattlesnakes because they had to use bulldozers to get the rattlesnakes out of the place where they make the building, raise the base there. So that was my first phase. I got my crew. The crew came and got assembled. I didn't pick them; they came. and I learned to fly with a crew. Learned a lot of formation flying in a B-17. Learned a lot of practice bombing. So we learned, the bombardier had to learn how to drop the bombs on, of course he knew already, but I had to get used to him, what he had to do, and he knew, so we had a team and worked. And then the gunners and the waist gunners and so forth, we had gunnery practice. We'd be flying, and we'd be flying low enough and they would have gunnery shoot. So they learned all the skills that they were going to have in combat. As I went through the advanced, I was given some options that they might fill if they could. And I did want to go to England because I didn't want to go to the islands. I really didn't want to fly over water. And I think too, I don't think there were many B-17s in the Pacific at that point. So I liked the B-17 and all these things combined that I wanted to go to England, and plus the fact, quote, it's more civil, if you will. So I was sent there. They sent me from Dallard Air Force Base to a base in Nebraska, Kearney, Nebraska. I was up there for a week. Gave me a brand new airplane. And I flew it from there to Maine, tried to fly to Goose Bay, Labrador, socked in all the way, came back, spent a week, and then flew back up. And then I landed there, spent another time. I was having some breathing problems. Flew from there, just a crew, and I took off in the middle of the night to Iceland. We passed right below the tip of Greenland, which was a bad place to go because it had a very difficult place to land there. We did not fly in formation. We flew in more of a group. They took off at intervals. So you were on your own. So we didn't have to coordinate with anybody. Landed, went from Iceland to Ireland and landed all right. And it was a beautiful thing there. Flying, I needed to fly east. And I saw something sticking out of the water. Kept on going, and the little thing had some green around the bottom of it. And the little thing turned out to be a lighthouse. Beautiful, because I knew where it was, and I was there. Went to England, got some orientation on England, what I was expected to do. Went to my base at Polebrook, was signed there. I was the first pilot of the airplane. I was signed there. I did some flying so people would know what I could do. Then I had my first mission. First mission, I flew as co-pilot for observation, and I flew it though, and we hit some sites on the coast of France, which was still occupied, and they used to shoot missiles at England, and our job was to obliterate those sites. Okay, the flak started coming up. Flak is stuff from down the ground. And I was so scared, I almost got sick. I really was that scared. But I couldn't stop flying. I couldn't say I can't fly anymore because I'd be a coward, and I didn't want to be a coward. I just couldn't stand being a coward kind of thing. I did go ahead and fly the mission and flew it home and landing okay, but I was frightened, but I was okay, apparently, in the eyes of my mentors. So I think I flew the next day or the next day, I don't know which it was, and they called and woke me in the morning, and you're going to fly as pilot this time. I'm saying this because it's completely true, and regardless of how it's taken, it is true. And I said, Lord, is today the day I get killed? Remember this, I was frightened, very frightened. And some kind of a peace came over me at that point in time. I've analyzed it over the years, and the best I can figure out is I made a decision, or somebody made it for me. You're either going to get killed, or you're not going to get killed. You have nothing to say about it, so get with it. And that's what held me for the rest of the time. It was so important. And I'm saying that you can take it any way you wish. So when I wake up in the morning, I was frightened, and I would say that to myself, and everything went okay. Now, I knew I was in danger, but I wasn't frightened of it. So I was able to fly my missions as first pilot all the way through without any further ado.
The CO comes in, and the briefing begins.
Well, the reason we didn't like to go to Berlin because it was so well defended. Very well defended. And it was a long trip. It was the longest trip we had. It took us something like 8 hours for a round trip. We flew formation all the way. Now, at that point in time, we had our fighter support for a part of the way in, say about halfway, I don't know how long. And then they had to turn back because they were out of gasoline. So we flew good tight formation so that our gunfire, now remember there's 10 guns on each airplane, 18 airplanes, that's a lot of lead you can be throwing out there. We'd go in formation, drop our bombs. We were at 29 to 31,000 feet. That's 5 miles up. We could still get hit. They could still hit us up there. But we'd drop our bombs and make a diving turn as a group, 18 airplanes, to the left and right and decrease left or right, changing altitude, airspeed, and direction all at the same time, trying to throw the gunners off, which worked out pretty well, except one time I saw an airplane ahead of me and the flak guns had a burst you could see, and I saw this flak gun, here's the airplane, and bursting right behind his tail. That's how good they were. During one of the missions, I remember that the airplane in the group ahead of us, which we could see very clearly, you could still have his bombs on board, got a direct hit from an anti-aircraft gun and blew up right there. And I even had a little bit of vestige of flex on my windshield. I was that close to it. Another time I was flying, and we were flying straight. I was pilot, of course, and the flak is what the gun that. The flak came up and burst right above my nose. Keep in mind that I'm going this way, 200 miles an hour. This flak is coming here. It was trying to get me, but that close. it burst right above my cockpit. And a piece of the flak came through the metal around the thing. It hit me on a parachute. Not even a scratch on me. We would fly, we would let down, after our bombing mission, we would let down over the Zuider Zee in Holland. Now the Zuider Zee was a lake then. It has since been dried, has been drained. On our last mission, which was to Oschersleben, I don't remember the purpose of it, but it was our last mission, and we were all sitting on our way home, and flying about 25,000, I would guess, in bandits, 12 o'clock level, meaning we had fighters coming in at a level altitude from the front. And so I saw a fighter, ME-109, Messerschmitt 109, was a fighter airplane that had a gun emplacement of a 20 millimeter gun which fired through its propeller hub, meaning you could fly the airplane and aim it like a gun and get more accuracy. So I could see the tracers coming in at me, and I felt them hit the right wing, right engine, then it on fire. So I put the fire extinguishers on and they didn't work. So I was dropping out of formation because I only had thrust from the two left engines. And it was dropped out. They made another pass at us and hit us again and killed the bombardier who was in the catwalk. Then what we're going to do, and I said, we're trying to put the fire out. But another pass at him and hit him and killed him instantly. So then I rang the alarm bell for everybody to get out. And the airplane went up on his wing, and because all the thrust was here, and I had to get back in the seat and straighten it up and put it on automatic pilot. By that time, everybody had gotten out. And so then I was able to get it started straight and level. So I got out and dropped out through the navigator's hatch. And I remember that all of a sudden I was twirling, I pulled the ripcord. Hey, should be out. Finally it came out, I could see it. It caught in a tree. My feet didn't even sting when it hit the ground. So I remember in training, they told us to try to hide your gear and go in a different direction from that gear. So I tried that, it didn't work. A policeman came over you see him on a motorcycle, and came and searched me. I had a Zippo lighter. I was flying then. He took my lighter. Don't ask me why, but I said, no, give it back. I think he was more frightened of me than it was of him. He gave it back to me. But anyway, he made me pick up my chute and my Mae West, which is my inflation thing, and walk to the little village, which is half a mile, something like that, and turned me over to the local people. So a fellow with a big long squirrel gun came and I said, can I sit down here? So I lay down there and took a nap. But before I did, he was screaming, just screaming. I took the lighter out, gave it to him, he shot and left. I was shot down on my 10th mission in my right wing, set on fire. I made another pass, hit us, killed the bombardier. We all jumped out and landed. We all landed safely, were interned into prison camps, and got home all right. All of us, the entire remainder part of the crew.
and it just climbs off all by itself. It does it itself. Okay?
Yeah, you're right there with me though.
Every time I open the hangar door to go flying, I realize that I'm one of the lucky guys doing something that I dreamt of as a kid.
I'm originally from Brooklyn, New York. Well, war had started at that time. I took a civil service exam and I passed that and went through the Casey Jones School of Aeronautics in New Jersey. When I finished that, I enlisted on the 14th of November of '42. I enlisted into the U.S. Army Air Force. So at the end of December of '42, we were put on the train again, went to Amarillo, Texas. And this is where we took our basic training on the B-17. Instead of going overseas in B-17s, we were sent up to Seattle, Washington. We spent a few months over there going through training on the new B-29s that were coming off, and they put us into what we call the Accelerating Service Testing Branch. It was finally finished, I would say, 43. Well, during that time, a young lieutenant colonel had finished his 25 missions in England, and he became the chief test pilot down there. That lieutenant colonel was sent up to McCook, Nebraska to take over the new B-29 group. Later he went to Tinian, Saipan, and he was the first one to drop the atomic bomb over Hiroshima. That was Lieutenant Colonel Paul Tibbets. The rest of us were sent back to Smoky Hill Army Airfield in Kansas, and we were put on B-24s, where we went through the flight training for that. When that was finished, by December, they said we were going overseas to England. We ended up at the airfield in Savannah, and there are two ways of going. There was the northern route, where you went to Goose Bay, Labrador, up to Greenland, Iceland, Scotland, into East Anglia. They gave us the southern route, or Bermuda for a few days, and then down to Rio de Janeiro for over a week, over to Spanish Morocco, into England, where we landed at Horsham St. Faith, was where our B-24 outfit of the 2nd Air Division. And of course, the British smiled and so forth and said, well, it's a little different over here. You had the Luftwaffe coming after you. You had I would say, the flak coming up at you. And by learning these and by going and to the bombing missions that you're going to be going, you'll need certain different formations on this here. Flak, the German flak, is 88 millimeter. Now, it was put on a lot of the tanks for anti-tank and so forth. And in Europe over there, they, I would say from Denmark to the edge of Spain, they had 139,000 anti-aircraft units. Now, each unit was about 8 to 10 guns. They were very accurate on this here. And the peculiar thing about it, most of our aircraft that was shot down was from anti-aircraft guns. Some of the Luftwaffe couldn't get up to that height and so forth. In other words, 25,000 feet for your B-17 and 32,000 feet for your B-24s. So, but the peculiar thing about it, you still couldn't get away from them. Most of our bombing missions, you were going at 20,000 feet, or even down to as much as 10,000 feet for bombing. And this is going over oil fields, steel mills, and all sorts of stuff. On these missions, of course, we always had to worry going in over there whether we'd make it back or not. And the British had told us, forget the last names and so forth of your crew and so forth. You still know them, but don't get too close to them for the simple reason there'll be changes of your crews on certain missions and so forth, where they're either killed or badly wounded, and the sudden change over there. So it was a real good idea to just concentrate, to go to your mission, hit it, come back again. And
you finish your 25 missions, then you go home. Typical mission, 3 o'clock in the morning, they woke you up, showered, shaved, and then that was about a half an hour or so forth. You went to eat, and usually you got powdered eggs and all the coffee you could drink. And that was because your missions usually took 8 to 10 hours long. So once that was done from briefing and so forth, so by, I would say, we'd get out to our aircraft, and by 8 o'clock we were going already, forming into our missions and so forth. Forming up was usually about 10,000 feet. Now in the 2nd Air Division of the B-24s and so forth, each one of our ships had a different colors on it. Mine was the 458th bomb group, which was the nose and the wing were painted white with red and blue circles on it. The rest of the fuselage was olive drab with yellow and red circles on it. So every half minute, we'd take off, circle, and look for that special plane. Once we saw that plane, we'd line up in formation behind it, and then they would, that plane would go back to the base, and we'd go onto our mission almost here. My first mission was on the 17th of February. It was of 1944. Saarbrücken, Germany, which was the southwestern section of Germany. It was a manufacturing place down there. What we did was cross the channel. Luftwaffe, of course, was waiting for you, but they didn't touch you. The reason for that, they called down to the anti-aircraft units. So we had to go through the anti-aircraft units through Holland, so to say. And once that was done, what we did was go between the Rhine River and, I would say, France. Well, it took the border of Holland, Belgium, Luxembourg, and France. So between that, there was much less anti-aircraft units over there. We got down there and about 20 miles away from our target. We turned our plane over to the bombardier. He took over. We went over and hit our target, went through France, back to Horsham St. Faith. So we were lucky in that because we had to contend with some of the Luftwaffe, so it wasn't that bad. No one was hurt, and we came home on this here. My 9th mission was Berlin, and we had, it was odd, we had some ham and eggs. So we, of course, we groaned when we heard it was Berlin, but we had to do it, so we went and do it. We flew over the North Sea. What we were going to go into was a bee's nest, you can say, and it was real bad. And then when we went over the North Sea, came near Denmark, we cut southeast into Berlin, where we were met by the Gelbe. If you don't know German, Gelbe is yellow and Nase is nose. So those were Me-109s, and they were Hermann Goering's elite. So, and of course, with all the anti-aircraft and everything on this here, it's a really tough mission, but at least my group made it through, or at least I made it through, but 2 of my crew were hit, and we made it back, and they were hospitalized, and they were out of the war. So again, what the British had told us, the change of crews on this here and so forth. Well, on the B-17, about 1935, 1936 is when they start building the B-17s. And several years later, General Hap Arnold stated that we would need a bomber that would carry a heavier bomb load, fly longer, fly higher, and well, I would say the differences was the B-17 could carry a bomb load of 6,000 pounds. The heaviest bomb was a 1,000-pounder. The B-24 could carry 8,850 pounds of bombs. The heaviest one was a 2,000-pounder. Now we flew at 32,000 feet, B-17 25,000 feet. And then 2,850 miles was for the B-24. The B-17 wasn't that long. Now, the other thing on on your B-17 cruising speed was 175 miles an hour. Cruising speed on a B-24 was much faster. So there was the difference between the two. And the B-24 was the first bomber to have a tricycle landing gear. So there was a difference on this. It looked like a flying boxcar, but it was much better than the B-17. But you can't tell it between the two of them. The other good difference was we had Pratt & Whitney engines, both. And the 1830 engines were right whirlwind of the others. So when you have to push a prop through to get the oil out of the right whirlwinds, we didn't have to do that with the Pratt & Whitney. The 24th mission was Christmas Eve. December, Frankfurt, Germany was our target. That's the main hub of all of Germany, railroads and so forth. Coming from the countries outside or going out, you change at Frankfurt. Still that way today. Well, we went through that way. We got through the anti-aircraft guns and everything. No one hurt in my crew. We bombed the railroad yards and the main train station or Bahnhof there. We also hit 2 chemical plants and their mines. About 30 miles north going back away, suddenly anti-aircraft opened up on us. They knocked out my left board engine, and we feathered that, and the flak also hit 4 of us. Now each flight aircraft had 1 EMT, and our EMT was the radio operator. So what happened on that, he fixed us up and so forth. As a matter of fact, I was hit just below a flak piece just cut right through below my knee and so forth. So he finally stopped the blood on that in some very small pieces below my right shoulder blade. Well, he fixed us up on that where we could keep flying. But when one of your engines or so forth gets knocked out, you fall out of formation. This is when the Luftwaffe really comes after you. So what happened on this here, two Messerschmitts came, Messerschmitt ME-109s came after us. So we were firing at them. We were firing at him. They knocked out my right inboard engine. So that sort of evened us out. Instead of flying with one engine on one side and two on, jockeying the controls, so we finally straightened out. But it also killed 3 of the crew members. The only ones that weren't hit was the top gunner flight engineer, the radio operator, and the co-pilot. So we thought, of course, we were goners. And, well, of course, this is where the real prey starts over there. And I guess the man upstairs was to hurt us because our P-51s came in and drove off, and 2 of them got us back to the channel. They could have taken us home all the way, but we said we could make it. We crash landed at home, stationed at Force in St. Faith. The 4 of us went to the hospital. Of course, the others went to the morgue, and the 3 were okay. And I was in for about a month in there, got about the middle of January, and said I'd make my 25th mission. And they sort of smiled and said, sorry about that. You can't use your aircraft anymore. It had over 100 holes in it, so it didn't help much. So it looked like a wing and a sieve underneath. Well, anyhow, I said, what about another one? So they sort of smiled, we don't have any more for you. And we have a different job. Now, I happen to be, my other part of May was in the 7407 European Command Intelligence Center. Well, in February 14th, that's Valentine's evening, they said, we're dropping you off into Germany to find out there's one aircraft plant in there, and there's also a prisoner of war camp outside of Frankfurt. Well, what happened on this here, I have relations in Frankfurt. Originally, my family came from Frankfurt, Germany, Hesse. But we moved to the States back in 1856 or something like that. Well, anyhow, I was dropped in around midnight, just outside of Frankfurt, got rid of my chute, and in the morning, I knocked on my uncle's door, and all he did was say, oh. He was surprised to see me, of course, but all he did was, oh. So I said, I'd like to stay with you, Uncle, for a few months or so forth. And I checked that, of course, that underground factory was hard to find and so forth, but the prisoner of war factory was camp was run by old colonel from the Luftwaffe World War I. He went by Geneva Convention, so that was okay. But when the First Army came in, then they showed me where that underground factory was, and we took the plans of that, which was the Horton brothers, A-20 and so forth. And what happened on this here, they sent it to Lockheed Later on, Lockheed built a plane, and it was a flying wing. So that's where we got our flying wing from. I was sent back to the States, to Salina, Kansas again, put on B-29s, went out to Marchfield, and they said they canceled out our flights, and they said getting out of service. But they kept some of us until 46, and I got out in February of 46. Then about June 16th of 1948 was the Berlin airlift. To be exact, the 26th of June is when it really started, because the only way that you could, between those two dates, they had the train going from Frankfurt into Berlin. Well, the Russians tore up about an hour, or I should say a mile of track. There went the train. But when we signed the treaty and so forth in there for Berlin, where it was into 4 sections, they didn't say we had the right to fly in there, which the Russians couldn't change. So this is how we had 3 corridors, 2 from in the British zone and the one from Frankfurt. The French flew out of the British zone on this here, even though they didn't want to do it. So this is when it was on a 24-hour scale. In other words, every half minute, takeoff time, flight to Berlin, and this ran on for all this time, back and forth on this here. We were as a matter of fact, they started off, the only ones that they had over there was UC-47s. But then they start from all over the world. When I was stationed over there, we had the C-82s with the clamshell in the back over there. But we were flying out of Wiesbaden and it was Rhine-Main on this here. So that was around the 60th Troop Carrier from Rhine-Main. And it ran until September of 1949, when finally, of course, the Russians gave up. By that time, I went back late 52, ended up at Bowling Air Force Base for like a reassignment. They wanted me to go to the Pentagon, but I said no, I'd rather not. So what they did in July of 53, I was put in SAC, and that was at Lake Charles, Louisiana. And I was in this 68 bomb wing at that time. So with B-47s. So of course, for 3 years I was in that. I got out of SAC. They say once in SAC, always in SAC. I got out of SAC. I went back to Germany again. And I was stationed at Neubiberg, just outside of Munich, with C-82s again, but with the 317th transport wing and so forth. We were flying the 82nd Airborne from Augsburg around over there. So about January 67, there was a converted beer hall that they changed into like a service club. And that is where in the 20s, where that was Hitler's hangout, and the Socialist Party of Hitler. So what happened on this here, of course, the communists and the socialists were fighting who's going to take over Germany. And what happened on this here, they raided, when Hitler was speaking over there, they raided it over there, and they were firing back and forth, but they didn't hit Hitler. So that was it over there. Of course, later on, the Socialist Party took over, the Nazis. Well, this service club, they had dances on Saturday, Friday and Saturday evening. So Saturday, I finally decided to go over there. And I went in, and they had a nice band and dance and so forth. So I asked this nice blonde-haired girl if I could dance with her. And she said, yeah. So I was dancing. While I was dancing, I said, you know, I bombed Munich once. And she looked at me. She says, yeah, you blew up my house. So to get even with me, she married me later on. But I had sponsored her over, and she left in July of '67, went to the States, and she stayed with her sister who lived in Rhode Island. I finally came back in '61, and when I came back, we got married in the 7th of April of 1961. From SAC back in '53, I took flight training in jets. The was a T-33. That was from '59 to '61 up at Westover Air Force Base, flying your F-102s. Then in '61. We flew down to Marysville, Tennessee, turned our F-102s in to F-104s, and then went down to Homestead Air Force Base. And from F-102 to F-104s, I finally retired in December 31st, '63. They didn't want me to retire it, because they wanted to send me over to Vietnam. And I said I put in my papers. So it went all the way up to the Chief of Staff, and he took a look at it and says, oh, an old SAC man. And he signed it off. That's how I got out. I got a call from the from the USO. They said, would you like to join the USO? I says, I don't know anything about the USO. I'm not a song and dance head. So what happened, they said, no, we'd like you to go to work for us as associate director. And I said, what do I have to do? They said it's an overseas assignment. Can you go? I said, can I take my family? He said, yes. So we ended up in Korea in September of '64 to '66 in Seoul, Korea. Like Bob Hope, Danny Kaye, all the rest of them would come over. We would send them out to the different units and so forth on this here. I liked it very much, and my kids liked it also on this here. And we also set up like tours, and one tour was to to meet the president of Korea. He was glad to have about, say, 10 officers and about 15 enlisted, and he would answer all questions. And that was Park Chung-hee at that time. So that went over big with the GIs, and of course the Korean people also. And we had a lot of fun over there for those 2 years. We came back to the States. They said, we can't use you anymore because the only opening was Vietnam and your family, and we don't send families over there, but there's an opening with the Army and Air Force Exchange Service. We'll give you a good write-up. So I went over there that same day, and they hired me. And that was just before the headquarters for Army and Air Force Exchange Service was moving to Dallas. And they said, we'd like to send you overseas. I says, where to? They says, how would you like to spend a few years in Thailand? We ended up in Bangkok, 2 years over there. And enjoyed it over there. Then by the time we got back, that was in '68, I said, you know, our kids are growing up, may as well Americanize them and start school over here. See, my life after that was education.
Welcome to Scott's Warbird Alley. You thought you were going to see the B-17 show, didn't you? Well, guess what you are. We looked all over the field for a B-17. The one we had planned to use is stuck in the mud down here. We call this slosh kosh now. But anyway, we're going to make do with this beautiful P-51. I thought it was appropriate to use a P-51 since the B-17s and the P-51s served together in the 8th Air Force in World War II. I'd like to introduce my guest today. Right here to my right is Uncle Jack Sinise. You recognize that name? Uncle Jack Sinise, Gary Sinise, one of our country's greatest actors. This is his uncle. And next to Uncle Jack was also another B-17 navigator, Don Casey. Don, pleasure to have you up here, sir. This wonderful book here was written by Don Casey. It's called To Fight for My Country, Sir. And it's about being a B-17 navigator in World War II, which both of these gentlemen were. They served in the same group, and they're going to talk about their training experiences on the B-17, and we're going to talk about that airplane, that wonderful airplane, of which this is the 75th anniversary of the B-17. It was designed in 1935. And I'm sorry we don't have one here to look at, but we're going to talk about that a little bit. Don, let me start with you. Let's talk about training, navigator training back in the 40s.
Well, 1943, when Jack and I started training, we were not together then and didn't know each other then. But we went through the aviation cadet program, which was moving at a very fast pace at that time because the 8th Air Force, which was primarily engaged in battle over Europe, was suffering horrendous losses due to the fact that they were not escorted by the P-51 fighters, which didn't exist at that time. In 43, 2 missions were flown, for example, to Schweinfurt, Germany, unescorted. And one was in August and one was in October. On each one of those missions, 60 B-17s were shot down with crews of 10 apiece, or 600, and the loss was 20% on those 2 occasions. But you can't keep up flying on a 20% loss ratio. You got 5 missions, you're gone. That was the experience of flying without fighter escort. But Jack and I got there from training. We both joined the 379th Bomb Group at Kimbolton, England, in the Midlands, and we did some more training there and started flying.
Jack, when you started your navigator training and you finished up and actually got your wings, did they pair you with other crew members at that time?
Well, what they did after you graduated, then you were assigned to a crew.
Wait a minute, we have a mic problem. Try this one.
Right here. That's what.
Yeah. After we graduated, you were assigned to a crew, and of course, the first thing you heard was, "Well, don't get sent to Pio, Texas." We trained in San Marcos, Texas, which is near Austin, but they say don't get sent to Pio, Texas, because it's nothing out there. All it is sky, horizon, and desert and rattlesnakes. Well, that didn't sound like the kind of place you wanted to go to, but naturally, when you looked on the board, there it was, Pio, Texas, for both of us. So when we got to Pio, why, we were assigned to a crew, and that's where you first met your pilot, co-pilot, and the gunners, and so forth. So, and then at that time, we started to fly around and get used to each other, and we didn't, as I say, we didn't do any bombing or anything like that, but we just, the pilots, you figure the pilot was new, the co-pilot's new, so you have to kind of get together and get to know each other. So that's how we started, at Pio, Texas. And then we did go, from that point, after a month or so, we went to Dyersburg, Tennessee, and did some more training. Not a whole lot, but that was our first real altitude mission at that time, which on our first flight we didn't make. We got up so far, and one of the engines started to go out, so we had to land at Stuttgart, Arkansas, and spend a couple days there while they put the plane back together again. But we did finally get through Dyersburg, and the next thing we're then shipped up to Kearney, Nebraska, and this was right after the first of the year. Nebraska gets a few blizzards and that type of thing, and the next thing you know, why, they say, well, you're going to be leaving here soon, and you're going to be given a brand new B-17, and you're going to fly it over to England. Well, that seemed, well, a little impossible that we're going to do all that, but I remember calling back home
telling my folks we're going to be leaving pretty soon, and if we can, we'll fly over the house. But I lived in the south suburb of Chicago at the time. Well, the only problem was that we didn't fly over my hometown of Blue Island. We flew over Joliet, Illinois at 3 o'clock in the morning, and there wasn't anybody out there waving towels and the rest of it. But when I mentioned it to my mother sometime later, and she said, "Oh, well, there was B-17s flying over, and we'd run out there and wave towels and so forth." Well, I said, "Well, the only thing is you didn't wave at us." But we did fly on from there. Our pilot, Steve King, he came from Akron, Ohio, and we got to Akron pretty much just after dawn, and we did fly over his house. That was one of the things. Should I take it from there? Well, from there we went up to Maine, and finally ended up at Goose Bay, Labrador, where the snow was so high. I mean, the runways were just tunneled more or less right through the snow drifts, and the snow was actually over the plane as far as being cut out where the runways were. And the next thing we're getting a briefing. Maybe I'm getting ahead of myself, but we're getting a briefing of how we're going to fly from there to Iceland, to Scotland, and end up dropping off the plane there. So we took off at night, and really you couldn't see the stars or anything like that. You just had a flight plan that they had put together based on what they knew as far as the winds and the conditions and so forth. I remember one thing they said, don't get too close to Greenland because the mountains are kind of high. And the one thing about Greenland, they had a radio beam that was directed directly south of Greenland. And at least when you went by that, you got one more or less one fix that you knew at least, well, I'm that far. After that, you were on your own flying over the Atlantic. So we ended up finally landing in Iceland. And we were there a couple days, and then flew to Prestwick, Scotland, dropped off the plane. Well, then I'll let you take it from there. Don, you were a 19-year-old navigator. Had you ever been out of the country?
No. I'd been to Canada maybe, but that was about it. Cuba when I was 2 years old, but not out of the country to speak of. And I wanted to go back to Iceland for a minute. When we landed there, we were in a different plane, of course, and we landed and we went in to have a drink at the officers' club, and we spent the night there. I met a Red Cross nurse, very lovely lady, who said, "Oh, your name is Casey." Well, there was a fellow named Casey who through here not too long ago, and he said he was going to be the hottest B-17 pilot in the 8th Air Force. Well, he wound up in the next room to me in Germany when I finally got there. The thing I remember about going to our new group, and Jack and I, again, were in different crews, but the navigators got no respect. We were the Rodney Dangerfields of the aircrew. We didn't do anything. You couldn't see what we were doing. And all we did was get them there and get them back, wherever it was. So it was a mystery what the navigators did, and most people thought, well, nothing much. And then if you're flying in a formation, as we flew in formations of 20 to 30 planes, depending on how many were available that particular day on a mission. So that if you were back in the formation, you were, as a navigator, merely keeping track of where you were. The lead navigator was guiding to where you were going to go, and we all followed the leader in tight formation. Keep in mind, I'm 19, Jack is 20, and we had a colonel who was a West Pointer named Maurice Preston, and I don't think he could ever get over the idea that 19-year-old kids could come over there ranked as second lieutenants after he had taken 4 years at West Point to become a lieutenant, and all of a sudden here we are, Army of the United States. Well, as far as I was concerned, he didn't think anything of us at all. I had the chance to show him what we could do, though, one day, and that was flying a mission, I think it was my 24th, and we were told to fly down to another base, get out of our plane, and do what they told us. Well, they don't tell the navigator anything, you know. So I got out, I got in this plane, and pretty soon a colonel came on board and sat in the co-pilot seat, and 2 bombardiers came on board. This was June the 12th of 1944, 6 days after the invasion. We were bombing an airfield behind the invasion lines. Well, I'm sitting there waiting for somebody to tell me what I'm supposed to do. All of a sudden, we're taking off. The plane is taking off. And I say, I must be the navigator. Well, Jack had been to a 2-week training course for lead navigators. I had never gotten any idea of that, so I didn't know what to do except to just navigate. Fortunately, it was only a 100-mile trip, but we flew in over the invasion front, and we dropped our bombs, and we got back to England and came back to our own base. On arrival at the base, they said, "We want to talk to you. Come into the office, please. You know, you were not supposed to do that. That was a mistake." I mean, how could that be? A mistake? Because it was a case of mistaken identity. The other group thought I was a trained lead navigator, and I didn't know what I was doing there, so I went out and flew the mission. But they said, we're gonna promote you. You've done the job now, so you're a lead navigator, but we're going to put you on a deputy lead ship. Oh, and what is the deputy lead? Well, you'll love that. It happens to be the hottest. They didn't say this. They kept it all secret. It happens to be the hottest spot in the formation because all the guns on the ground are aiming at the lead ship. And we had already lost 3 deputy lead planes. Not a lead ship, but 3 deputy lead planes. So I thought, well, this sounds great. I wrote home to the folks, said, I'm just being promoted to deputy leader. Well, 2 missions on deputy lead, and we're hit and shot down. Now, that shoot-down experience is unique. And what you don't think about is that what do you do when your plane is on fire and the pilot says bail out? And you have not practiced any of that. You don't know what to do. You don't know anything about where you are, except the target was Hamburg, Germany that day. The previous August, the British and Americans had flown 3 nights and days and bombed Hamburg so badly that 75,000 civilians were killed or made homeless. So, unbeknownst to us, the Hamburg was the worst place you could pick to get shot down. They had distinct memories of what it was like to be bombed the way we had bombed them, and the civilians were told by Adolf Hitler, it's all right to take your revenge on the flyers that are parachuting out of the planes. And Hitler further ordered that the troops should not interfere with the civilians taking their revenge on us. Well, as a result, 2 of our guys were beaten to death on the ground. 1 was shot in his parachute. 1 more was killed when the plane blew up. 2 more had ropes around their neck and were rescued by the soldiers. I had a unique experience, as everyone was. You don't all land together. You're scattered all over the countryside. And I landed in a little suburban area right across from a military hospital in which the wounded German soldiers are hanging out the window watching me come down in my big white umbrella. And so what did I do when I landed? The memory was, hide your parachute. So I hid my parachute. They're watching me across the street. Jack. And I'll cut this short, but I was rescued by 2 German soldiers with guns, and we had been told, you have a .45 automatic, you can carry that if you want to, but we don't recommend it because the Germans can shoot you just because you have a gun. And say, well, he tried to pull a gun on me, so he shot him. So I didn't carry a gun. I put my hands up, and the war was over for me. They took me to an air raid shelter for a brief time. I sat amongst the German civilians while the rest of the raid was going on. And then they took me to a camp compound in Hamburg where I recognized the name over the stockade. And in a book I had read in the previous high school, I'm only 19, so back when I was 17, I read this book about this prison camp at Fuhlsbüttel in Hamburg where they beat and tortured the prisoners. Well, it turned out that this was not the same prison, but from there they took us to the Great Escape Camp. I'll pass the mic over to Jack.
Jack, let's talk about the crew members that you met. You guys are all young, 18 to 22 years old for the most part. And you didn't really want to make friends because they were losing so many people. You touched on that. I think in 42, when the 8th Air Force went into England, every time they went on a mission, they lose about 1/3. So you didn't want to make friends.
1943 is when.
Yeah.
Well, the thing with it is that you train with your crew when you get over there, and the way the mission started out, you're going to go on your first mission now after we did some practicing around England, and so you don't know what's going to happen. And when I was asked about it before, we flew into France, and so the first time that you see the flag starting to come up, well, that's gee, look at that, these little bursts around, and then you're looking over and you see a plane get hit, and that goes down. But it was like a movie. It wasn't happening to you. It's just you're out there watching this thing. I think it took about 5 missions before you suddenly realized that somebody was shooting at you, and that one of those that you were watching could be you. But initially, I wasn't really scared. I just, because you don't know what's going to happen. And it just seemed like, well, that's nice. And look at that. Well, that guy blew up. And here come the shoots and all this business. But after the 5th mission, you kind of begin to think about, wait a minute, they're not playing games down there. And so it began to, at least you thought about it. So when I started out, I just was the regular navigator. But when I became a lead navigator, because you're in the lead ship, there were certain things you had to do. The busiest time was from the time that you started on the bomb run till that was over. So, but that was also the kind of the roughest time, because by that time, they know they've got the flak gun zeroed in on you. They know where your altitude is and so forth. And kind of all hell is breaking loose around you, but you are so busy that because you have to check with the bombardier, and the plane went on autopilot through the bomb site, and one of the things you had to do was to look at this indices that comes down on the bomb site and count out how many inches it is from the middle point, because that would tell the pilot how far away he was from taking over the control of the plane. When that indices got down to the middle, then the bombs dropped. But they wanted him to know just how much longer he had to wait before he took control of the plane. After the bombs had dropped, pilot took over, and you'd make your turn and get out of there. But actually, maybe it was good that you were busy at that time, because you didn't really have time to think about what's going on. But that was the busiest time, and after you made your turn and you start on home, well, then it kind of let down a little bit. When you got back home, you went to the briefing because they wanted to see what you had to say. And one thing I remember is I was 20 years old then. I wasn't really drinking by that time, but one of the things they did, take you in the briefing room, and right in the middle of the table was a bottle of old Overholt rye whiskey, and everybody had to have a couple of shots of that.
because you've been flying for 6-7 hours, you haven't eaten, and that was supposed to relax you. Well, it did, pretty good. But that was kind of my first experience in having a hard drink. Because when I graduated from high school, at that time, in my senior class, I don't know of anybody that smoked. I don't know anybody that drank. They did go out with girls, I do remember that. But it was a little different time. And it took a while before maybe you might start having a little extra beer or something like that. But I always just remember the first time taking a shot of that old Overholt. I never forgot it. But that would relax you. So, well. One of my favorite movies of all time was The Great Escape with Steve McQueen and James Garner. Just a great movie. I'm sure you all agree, right? Well, Don was there. He was in The Great Escape prison, Stalag Luft 3. And in his book here, he talks about the differences in the movie and the actual happenings. So, and now I'd like Don to talk about that.
Well, thank you. When I wrote the book originally, I poo-pooed what Steve McQueen had done in the movie because I thought it never happened. Well, I had a book at home written by the fellow whose character Steve McQueen played. His name was Gary Sinise. He had an unusual story himself. He was captured in Africa. He was an OSS man, which was a forerunner to the CIA. Sage actually did all of the things that Steve McQueen did, including throwing his baseball over the little guardrail and then walking in where you were liable to be shot immediately if you did so. I had to rewrite that part because I found that all the things that Steve did, except the motorcycle ride, which was not a feature of the actual story, was actually done by this fellow Sage, and I recanted and rewrote it so that it reflected credit on him. The thing about the prison camp was that the Great Escape Camp was in western Poland. There were 10,000 flying officers in that one camp, Allied flying officers. How many planes do you think they had to shoot down to get that number? Plus, there were other camps with flying officers. Well, General Bub Clark wrote, and I knew him in the prison camp, he was a colonel then, that there were 10,000 bombers shot down, of our bombers, and 8,000 fighters. Now, I can't authenticate that for you, but that would show you the type of losses we were suffering. And even though the percentages got better flying, so well, your chances of getting to 28 missions were fair. But in the early days of 1943, as I found out from talking to prisoners of war who had been shot down in that period of time, the number of missions was less than 5 before they were shot down, some on their first mission, because they were flying without escorts. The prisoner of war camp was an experience I'll never forget. I have to say that the reason I'm dressed the way I am today is because I still have the mental state of a prisoner who said, never again am I going to be like an animal behind the barbed wire, starving and being just living a terrible existence. We were lucky that we did survive, but we had some terrible moments that next winter of January 1945. The Russians were within 20 miles of our camp. We could hear their cannons going off. And so we knew that something was going to happen. Unbeknownst to us, Hitler had ordered we all be marched out of there, which we were, at 15 degrees below zero in a blizzard, with everything we owned on our backs. And we marched, I think, 35 miles the first night without stopping, except for we had a little rest period there. And we then marched to a little town called Moscow. We're going west from the camp because the Russians were coming from the east. And we managed to get inside a factory where there was heat, and we were able to take our clothes off for a change and get some relief from the cold. From there, a day and a half later, they marched us out, and we went another 10 miles in the cold weather and boarded cattle cars that were built to hold 40 men or 8 horses. One couldn't have both, but a lot of people think that's what it was. They put 50 of us in each one of these cars, and there wasn't room for everybody to sit down at once. At one point, we pulled into Regensburg. I know now what it was. I didn't know then. And the air raid sirens went off. And the German guards locked us in and left. And we didn't know what the target was. Maybe we were sitting in this marshalling yard. Maybe we were the target. We had no knowledge of whether there was any signs. And it was nighttime anyway, so what are you going to do? We waited. They heard the planes flying over. We heard the bombs dropping in the distance. And then we moved on again from there. That was an experience that you don't want to live through, where you're locked in a cage and you hear an air raid siren go off. We went on from there on the train to Bavaria, to a camp called Stalag 7A. Now, this camp was built for 40,000 prisoners. When we got there were already 100,000. We added another 10,000. By the time we were liberated, it was 130,000. Conditions there were deplorable. It was the worst. We had fleas. We were starving. We lost weight. I think I got down to about 120 pounds. And finally, Patton's Army, on April 29th, 1945, I'll never forget that day as long as I live. The gunfire going on outside of camp. We heard cannon fire. And Patton's 14th Armored Division overran our camp. The Germans fled. We were in shock, most of us. I was in particular, because you don't actually realize, say, how can this be? We're free to go. Patton came into our camp 3 days later, May 2nd, and we stood at attention in our rags, in our awful condition. He said 5 words to us: "Have you enough to eat?" Well, that wasn't the point, really. It was what we could eat, not if we had enough to eat. And our stomachs were in such condition, we could not eat regular food. I actually went one day, walked down to a mess kitchen run by our Army, and they offered us food. We couldn't eat it. Went back to camp and waited for the people to come and get us. Patton, I had my impression of Patton at the time. He had a scowl on his face. And I thought, well, why is he scowling? We're happy, we're liberated. And I read finally in his diary, he said, what a fine bunch of men. But then I read a speech last year that he gave to his troops before the invasion. And in that speech, he said to his own men, "My men don't surrender. And I don't want to hear about any of you being captured unless you were wounded. And even then, I expect you to keep on fighting." So I formed the opinion, as I said originally, that Patton was kind of disdainful of prisoners of war because we must have screwed up or we wouldn't be there. You know? But I forgave him. He was a great general and a great character, and he set us free. That was the end of that experience. But I have to say that every prisoner of war who's been to prison for any length of time comes away with post-traumatic stress disorder. I believe that Senator McCain, if he'll forgive me, I believe he's still suffering from his imprisonment. We had these thousands of men there in those conditions. It had to affect you. And so when I read now about the post-traumatic stress disorder and the troops coming back from Afghanistan and Iraq, I believe every bit of it, because in that war, like our war, the shooting came from every direction. You didn't know where it was coming from. You don't know what's coming next. You don't know who the enemy over there is. And that our men are legitimately affected by that. So I express sympathy for them, and I recommend that you consider that too when you read about them. Their war is terrible over there, and they're suffering for it. But I'm proud of my experience. I'm proud to be here. And when I raised my 4 sons, I used to tell them they'd have something for dinner that they didn't particularly like broccoli or something like that. And so I said, well, learn to enjoy that food, because someday you might be in a place where that's all there is to eat. And while the other people are making up their mind whether they're going to eat it or not, you can be gorging yourself on this food that you've learned to eat. But I'm proud to be associated with Jack. Jack and I want to say that briefly, were navigators who nobody told anything, who never got any respect. We had trouble just keeping busy off when there was nothing doing. And Jack and I would go down to the link trainer. Anybody know what a link trainer is? Okay. A link trainer is a dummy plane that flies electrically on the ground, and it's not an aerial flying airplane. Jack and I would take turns getting in the pilot's seat, pull the hood over, and fly on the instruments. Well, we didn't know how to fly in the first place. So the voice would come over the microphone. You are now 200 feet below ground. Pull up. So what we did, those crazy things we did, were things that you did in combat to keep your wits about you. You couldn't think and dwell on what it was like to go on your next mission and where we're going next. You had to pretend that it didn't happen. If somebody got shot down, as I did, Jack told me later when I saw him after the war, he said I had to be philosophical about that. And, you know, maybe I expected more from Jack as such a buddy, but that's how we did it. You have to say, sorry, Joe, you're down. We miss you. We got to go on with our job.
He told me before we started, I said, what do you want to talk about? He said, I was a trial lawyer for 50 years, so I don't have to do much talking. But I'm looking at some serious medals here, guys. I don't know if you can see this or not, but I see Distinguished Flying Crosses. I see air medals with oak leaf clusters, and you proudly wear them, and rightfully so. Thank you so much for what you did for us.
Thank you.
I want to ask you this. We still got a few minutes here. What does being a B-17 crew member mean to you now? Do you keep up with your old buddies?
Well, they're all dying off. Jack and I are among the few that are left. My crew is all dead. So you became very close to those fellows because, for example, in the Navigator particularly, sat in the nose compartment of the B-17 with the bombardier, and we were there on takeoffs and landings. Well, the rules said get back in the back and go to the radio room and sit with your back against the wall. Well, we didn't pay any attention to that. We knew nothing was going to happen to us, and we did crazy things like that.
Tell about that. Okay.
Oh. Well, we shared this pilot. I flew only 2 missions with Steve King. And a couple of stories about Steve. He was recognized already before we got shot down as a real comer to be a leader in the group. And Steve had signed up for his second tour before he finished the first one. He was promised a promotion. He was promised a leadership role. And I think he had the toughest time when we got shot down because his eyes were on a career in the Army. But the story that Steve told most I remember was about his top gunner, Ray Wheeler. And Ray Wheeler had shot down 5 German fighters from his top turret. Steve went to Ray one time and he said, you know, when that fighter came onto us, he was shot down. He said, what were you waiting for? And Ray said, well, I wanted them to get a little closer so I could make a sure kill. And Steve said, for God's sake, don't do that again. Shoot at him even if he's out of range. Don't try to scare him away. That was the kind of crews we had. They were guys that had tremendous guts, and they did what they were told to do, and they performed well.
For the last 17 years, it's been my privilege to be a crew member on the EA's B-17 Aluminum Overcast. And I've been all over this country, and I've heard thousands of these stories, and what a privilege it is to talk to these gentlemen and thank them for what they did. And right now, I'm going to ask all the veterans in the audience, would you please stand and be recognized? All the veterans, please. Now, all you people that are sitting down, you should turn to those veterans and thank them for your freedom. Over in the Warbird area, right over here in the gift shop, these gentlemen are going to be there in a few minutes signing autographs. And we want to encourage you to join the EA Warbirds of America, all of you. You don't have to be a pilot, just have an interest in the history and heritage of this country. Thank you so much for watching Warbirds in Review.